Okay, so now you've chosen the right mic, how do you actually use it? This is not quite as silly a question as it might sound, because mic placement and mic technique are both crucially important factors for successful live sound reinforcement. An obvious rule of thumb says that the closer you place your mic to a sound source, the louder the signal will be. But listen to the changes here when we move this mic around in front of a guitar amp. With the mic pointing at the speaker, the sound is true, but it can be a bit hard if it's pointing directly at the cone of the speaker. Moving it to the side, or turning the mic sideways so that it's what we call off-axis, will often soften the sound. You can use a regular mic stand with a boom, or you could thread the cable through an amp's handle and drape the mic down the side of the cabinet. This is a perfectly legitimate technique. Here, above all, don't be afraid to experiment. A guitar amp's mic is not going to wander about during the gig very much, but when it comes to vocals, movement is somewhat unavoidable. So let's look at this thing called mic technique. A mic may not be an instrument as such, but there's definitely a technique to using one. Take the amateur talent contest, where you can often come across a great singer whose vocal gets louder and softer as they wander about in front of the mic, sometimes hitting the element in the mic dead centre, other times singing outside of it altogether. Watching a seasoned professional singer, and yes, they too will move the mic around, but here you'll notice they're actually manipulating the sound, tone and intensity of their voice by how loud they're singing and how close they are to the mic when they're doing so. Close in, they'll sing relatively softly and get quite a deep, rich tone, thanks to something called the proximity effect.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound.
As they increase their own volume, they'll proportionately pull back the mic or move their head away, so that although their voice seems to be getting louder, actually what you're hearing is simply a greater intensity level. You're suddenly not deafened by the vocal, in other words. This, and more, is called good mic technique. When you're testing or setting up your own mic on stage, you need to set your levels so that when you sing or talk softly, the tone and levels will be good, and when you sing at your loudest, the signal will not overload and your mix will distort. The biggest enemy of life on stage is feedback. This painful whistling noise, caused when a microphone hears a nearby loudspeaker, is typically blamed on the microphone. Please view the special section on the subject of feedback and how to avoid it. The mixer is the brain of your sound reinforcement system. A wide variety of sound sources are sent into a mixer: vocal mics, instruments, mic'd amplifiers, CD player, and the mixer will then process and balance all of them into one unified sound or mix for your audience to listen to. It's a complicated procedure, and you certainly don't become a skilled front-of-house engineer overnight. Having said that, understanding a mixer is not actually as forbidding as at first glance it might seem. Why? Because although it seems as if you have to learn an entire panel's worth of knobs and faders, a mixer is mostly made up from what are called channel strips, all of which have identical controls. So, learn the controls on one channel strip and you've learned them all. There's more to a mixer than channel strips, of course, but that's a great start to this particular voyage of discovery. A mixer has more things connected to it than any other device in the sound system. Signals coming in are referred to as inputs, signals coming out, outputs. This is a standalone mixer, which you connect to an amplifier and loudspeakers. Some mixers also include amplification, and these are called powered mixers. These are covered later in this scene. On standalone mixers, the inputs are normally situated here, at the rear, though sometimes you'll come across a mixer with inputs right at the back of the main panel. This is where you plug in the cables from your instruments and microphones, and each of these connects to an individual channel on your mixer so that you can make individual adjustments to that sound. You'll notice that each channel has two input connectors. One, a multi-pin balance connection called an XLR, which is mainly for microphones, and the other a 1/4-inch jack connector marked line, which essentially you use for most everything else. Mixers are used to process sound, and sometimes this involves the use of special audio effects. Although some mixers may come with an effects processor built in, you may also want to use a dedicated effects processor. And these are also plugged in at the back. There are two methods of connecting effects units to a mixer. The first is into an individual channel via a two-way connection called an insert point. This you would use for a device that's designed to be used just on one sound or one channel at a time, like a compressor or limiter. The second is into a circuit called an auxiliary bus, which then lets any channel make use of the effect. You'd use this method for something like a digital reverb unit. An auxiliary bus is simply a special piece of wiring in a mixer that can be tapped into by other channels or controls, rather like, well, stops on a bus route. So we have a number of sound sources and effects processors coming into the mixer. How does the sound leave? All mixers will have at least one set of outputs that carry the unified or mixed signals out to your main amplification system. Usually, they'll have a second set of outputs that can send a different balance or mix to an amplification system designed for the musicians or performers on stage to hear, so that they can monitor or listen to themselves and each other. This is called a monitor system, and that mix will come out of its own set of outputs at the back. Completing our front panel overview, the other knobs and faders, aside from those that run along the channel strip, relate to effects and monitoring and the group functions. This area of the mixer is referred to as the master section, as it has all of the output controls.